I am 26 years old and my husband is 28. We had been married for 3 years, and for the most part, they were good years. We had our disagreements, like any couple, but nothing that ever felt like a chasm between us. Nothing that felt like a betrayal. That feeling was new, and it was cold, and it started at his parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. The party was extravagant. It was held at a beautiful old hotel with crystal chandeliers and waiters in crisp white jackets. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had always been a woman who cared deeply about appearances. She wanted the best of everything, and she wanted everyone to know she had it. My husband, Mark, had always been eager to please her. He was a good son, I thought. A devoted son. The evening was winding down. Desserts had been served, and the string quartet in the corner was playing something soft and lovely. Mark stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. Everyone turned to look at him, their faces glowing in the candlelight. I smiled at him, feeling a surge of pride. He looked so handsome in his suit. He cleared his throat and raised his glass. He started with a few jokes about his father, David, and his love for golf. Everyone chuckled. He spoke about his childhood, about the loving home his parents had provided. It was a perfect speech. And then he came to the end. He turned his gaze to his mother, his eyes shining with adoration. "And finally," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to thank my incredible mother, Eleanor." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your spirit. And thank you for paying for all of this, for this beautiful night that none of us will ever forget. We love you." To Mom and Dad. The room erupted in applause. People were cheering, raising their glasses. Eleanor was beaming, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. David, my father-in-law, put his arm around her and kissed her on the cheek. I clapped along with everyone else, my smile feeling stiff on my face. Something felt wrong. It was a tiny, sharp feeling, like a splinter in my mind. We had talked about the party's budget for months. Mark had been stressed about the cost. We had dipped into our joint savings. We had made sacrifices. But Eleanor paying for the whole thing? The entire lavish six-figure event? It didn't make any sense. I looked at Mark, trying to catch his eye. But he was busy accepting congratulations from his aunts and uncles. I pushed the feeling down. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe Eleanor had stepped in at the last minute with a surprise contribution. I decided not to spoil the moment. I would ask him about it later, when we were alone. I kept the smile on my face and drank my champagne, but the bubbles tasted flat. The rest of a party passed in a blur of polite conversation and forced smiles. I felt a growing distance between myself and the celebration, as if I were watching it all from behind a thick pane of glass. Each time someone complimented Eleanor on her generosity, the splinter in my mind dug a little deeper. On the drive home, the car was silent. The music from the radio filled the space that our words should have. I kept waiting for Mark to say something, to explain the speech. But he just stared out at the road, a small, self-satisfied smile on his lips. I finally broke the silence as we pulled into our driveway. "That was a beautiful speech," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Thanks," he said, turning off the engine. "I thought it went well. Mom was really happy." "She seemed to be," I said. "I was just a little confused about one part, when you said she paid for everything." He shrugged, his hand on the door handle. "Yeah, well, it's easier to just say it that way. She helped out a lot. It's all family money anyway, right?" He opened his door before I could respond, leaving me alone in the quiet car. "It's all family money." His words echoed in my head, but it wasn't. A significant portion of our joint savings had come from my salary, from my bonuses. And then there was my other account. The one he wasn't supposed to know about. The one that was just mine. I shook my head, trying to clear the uneasy thoughts. I was being paranoid. He was probably right. It was just an exaggeration, a way to make his mother feel good. I followed him into the house, determined to let it go. The next day was a Monday. I woke up feeling tired, the unease from the night before still lingering like a bad dream. Mark had already left for work. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, trying to focus on the week ahead. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but the area code was local. I hesitated for a moment before answering. Hello? Good morning, may I speak with Clara? A man's professional voice asked. This is she, I replied. Clara, this is Robert Harrison from the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank. I'm one of the senior account managers here. I'm calling about some recent activity on one of your accounts. My heart began to beat a little faster. Okay, I said slowly. Which account? It's a personal savings account, he said. The one designated as a legacy trust. Ice flooded my veins. The legacy trust. That was the account my parents had set up for me before they passed away. It was my inheritance, my safety net. The money I was supposed to use to start my own business one day. A dream I had shared with them. It was a sacred space, a final gift from them. Mark knew how much it meant to me. We had discussed it when we were creating our wills. He knew it was separate from our marital assets. What kind of activity? I asked. My voice barely a whisper. There was a large wire transfer initiated on Friday afternoon, Mr. Harrison said, for $112,450. Given the size of the transaction and the fact that the account has been mostly dormant, our fraud detection system flagged it for review. I just wanted to call and personally verify that you authorized this transfer. $112,000. The blood drained from my face. I couldn't breathe. The room started to spin. No, I managed to choke out. No, I did not authorize that. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I see, Mr. Harrison said, his voice now filled with concern. The transfer was authorized online using your security questions and password. The recipient was Elegant Events, LLC. Elegant Events. That was the name of the company that planned the anniversary party. I had seen the name on the invoices Mark had left on his desk. The exact cost. The exact amount that was now gone from my inheritance. From my parents. The splinter in my mind was no longer a splinter. It was a gaping wound. Mark's words from the night before came rushing back. Thank you for paying for all of this. He hadn't just exaggerated. He had lied. He had stolen from me. He had taken the most precious thing I had left of my parents and given it to his mother so she could look good in front of her friends. Clara, are you still there? Mr. Harrison asked gently. I couldn't speak. A sob was caught in my throat, hot and painful. I sank to the floor, the phone slipping from my hand and clattering onto the tiles. The world had tilted on its axis. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was a stranger. And he was a thief. The trust I had placed in him, the very foundation of our marriage, had been bulldozed in a single, calculated act of betrayal. I curled into a ball on the cold kitchen floor and finally let the sob escape. It was a raw, animal sound of pure agony. The party, the speech, the applause. It was all a performance, and I was the unwitting fool who had paid for the tickets. After what felt like an eternity, I picked the phone back up. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it. Mr. Harrison, I said, my voice hoarse. Can you freeze the account? Can you do anything to stop this? The transfer has already been processed and cleared, Clara, he said, his tone apologetic. Since it was authorized with the correct credentials, the bank treated it as a legitimate transaction. The best course of action now would be to file a police report for fraud. We can provide all the necessary documentation for their investigation. A police report. Against my own husband. The thought was sickening. It made this all so real, so irreversible. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for calling me. I ended the call and sat in the silence, the weight of his betrayal crushing me. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of theft and deception. He had waited until Friday afternoon, knowing the banks would be closing for the weekend, knowing the transfer would clear before I had a chance to notice. He had planned this. I needed to see it for myself. I needed undeniable proof before I confronted him. With trembling fingers, I retrieved my laptop from my bag. I sat back down at the kitchen table, the coffee in my mug now cold and forgotten. I opened the browser and typed in the bank's website. My fingers fumbled on the keyboard as I entered my username and password. The page loaded, showing a summary of my accounts. I clicked on the Legacy Trust account, the one named Clara's Future. My parents had named it that. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The balance was displayed in bold black numbers. It was a fraction of what it should have been. My breath hitched. I scrolled down to the transaction history, and there it was. Friday, wire transfer. Recipient, Elegant Events, LLC. Amount, 112,450 Arzir. Seeing it in black and white on the official bank ledger made it impossible to deny. A wave of nausea washed over me. He had used my security questions. How did he know them? The name of my first pet, the street I grew up on, my mother's maiden name. I had told him these things over the years, in moments of intimacy and trust. He had collected these pieces of my life and weaponized them against me. My shock was slowly being replaced by a cold, hard rage. I thought about Eleanor, beaming with pride at the party. Had she known? Had she been in on it? The thought made me feel even more sick. It's all family money anyway, right? Mark's casual dismissal echoed in my ears. He didn't see it as mine. He saw it as a resource for his family, for his mother's vanity. He saw me not as his partner, but as a bank. I closed the laptop. I couldn't sit in the house any longer. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, not knowing where I was going. I just needed to move, to breathe air that wasn't thick with his lies. I drove for hours, the scenery passing by in a meaningless blur. I replayed every conversation we had ever had about money, about our future, about his family. I searched for clues, for warning signs I might have missed. There were so many. The way he always deferred to his mother. The way he would get defensive if I ever questioned her. The casual remarks about how lucky I was to have that nest egg from my parents. I had seen them as minor annoyances, as typical in law dynamics. I had been a fool. When I finally returned home, it was dark. Mark's car was in the driveway. My stomach twisted into a knot. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I walked into the house and found him in the living room, watching TV as if nothing had happened. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, you're back late. Everything okay?" The casualness of his question was like a slap in the face. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed. I didn't answer him. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch. His smile faltered. He muted the TV. "Clara, what's wrong? You're looking at me like I killed your dog." "Worse," I said, my voice low and steady. "You robbed my parents' grave." His face went pale. "What are you talking about? That's a horrible thing to say." "Is it?" I took a step into the room. "I got a call this morning, Mark. From my bank. From Mr. Harrison at Sterling National." I watched as the color drained completely from his face. He knew. Of course he knew. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a cornered animal. "He was calling to confirm a wire transfer," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "A very large wire transfer. From my legacy account. The account my parents left me. The one you swore you would always help me protect." "Clara, I can explain," he stammered, finally finding his voice. He stood up from the couch. "It's not what you think." "Oh, I think I know exactly what it is," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I think you stole $112,450 from me to pay for your mother's party." I think you did it behind my back, using my personal information. And then I think you stood up in front of our entire family and gave the credit to her. Am I wrong? He stared at me, his eyes wide with panic. He ran a hand through his hair. Look, it was a loan, he said, his voice pleading. I was going to pay you back, I swear. I got in over my head with the party costs. Mom wanted everything to be perfect, and I didn't want to disappoint her. A loan? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You don't take a loan by stealing someone's password and security questions. You don't take a loan without asking. You call that stealing, Mark. It has another name, too. It's called fraud. Don't say that, he whispered, his eyes darting around the room as if the walls were listening. Please don't say that word. It was a mistake. I was going to tell you about it after the party, once things calmed down. When? I demanded. When were you going to tell me? Next week? Next month? Or were you just hoping I'd never noticed that $100,000 had vanished from my account? Of course not, he insisted, taking a step towards me. I took a step back. I was going to get a bonus at the end of the year. I was going to put it all back. You would have never even known. His words were meant to be reassuring, but they only confirmed the depth of his deception. He hadn't just wanted to borrow the money. He had wanted to take it, use it, and replace it without my knowledge. He had wanted to violate my trust and face no consequences. He thought I was that stupid, that unobservant. So you were just going to lie to me indefinitely? I asked, my voice shaking with rage. You were just going to let me believe that your mother was this wonderfully generous person, while all along it was my money? My parents' money? You're making this into a much bigger deal than it is, he said, his tone shifting from pleading to defensive. The gaslighting was beginning. It's just money, Clara. We're a family. We're supposed to help each other out. Why are you being so selfish about this? Selfish? The word hit me like a physical blow. I'm being selfish? You stole from me, Mark. You took the one thing I have left of my parents, the future they wanted for me, and you used it to throw a party. And you call me selfish? It was for my mother, he yelled, his voice rising. She deserved it, after everything she's done for us. What has she done for us? I shot back. Besides criticize my cooking and make passive-aggressive comments about my career, what has she done that's worth $100,000 of my inheritance? You wouldn't understand, he muttered, turning away from me. You've always had it easy. You've always had that money sitting there, a nice little cushion. You don't know what it's like to have to work for things, to want to give your parents the world. The audacity of his statement left me breathless. I was the one who had worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I was the one who had built a career from scratch, without any family connections. He had gotten his job at his uncle's firm. He had never had to worry about a single thing in his life. Get out, I said, my voice flat and devoid of all emotion. He whipped his head around. What? Get out of my house, I repeated, pointing towards the door. Clara, don't be ridiculous, he scoffed. This is my house too. We can talk this through. We can work it out. There is nothing to work out, I said. You have broken something that can never be fixed. I look at you and I don't see my husband. I see a stranger. A liar and a thief. Now, get your things and go to your mother's house. The one I apparently paid for you to celebrate. He stared at me, his mouth agape. He saw the look in my eyes and knew I wasn't backing down. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a sullen resentment. Fine, he spat. If that's how you want to be, but you're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away our marriage over some money. He stormed up the stairs and I could hear him angrily throwing things into a bag. I stood frozen in the living room, listening to the sounds of my life falling apart. He was right about one thing. Our marriage was being thrown away, but he was the one who had set it on fire. He came back downstairs a few minutes later, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He paused at the front door, looking at me one last time. "You'll regret this," he said. "The only thing I regret," I said, my voice as cold as ice, "is ever trusting you." He slammed the door behind him. The sound echoed through the empty house. I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline that had been coursing through me disappearing, leaving me weak and hollow. I was alone. The life I had built was a lie. The man I loved had betrayed me in the most profound way possible. I didn't cry. I was past tears. I just sat in the darkness, a single thought running through my mind over and over again. He was not going to get away with this. Neither of them were. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and numb, empty days. I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of pretending everything was normal. I spent hours staring at the wall, replaying the confrontation with Mark in my head. His words, his justifications, his complete lack of remorse. He didn't think he had done anything wrong. In his mind, he was entitled to my money. In his mind, I was the selfish one for being upset. The gaslighting had been so blatant, so textbook. It made me wonder how many other times he had twisted reality to suit his own narrative. I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't carry this alone. I called my best friend, Chloe. We had known each other since college, and she was the most level-headed person I knew. I told her everything, from the speech at the party to the phone call from the bank to the final ugly confrontation. I expected her to be shocked, but she was something more. She was furious. "That absolute snake," she hissed through the phone. "I never liked him, Clara. I never trusted him. There was always something about the way he looked at his mother. It wasn't normal." "I know," I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't want to see it." "Of course you didn't," she said, her voice softening. "You loved him. You wanted to believe the best of him. But this is unforgivable. This isn't just about money. He violated you. He stole your security, your history, your parents' legacy. And for what? So his mommy could have a nice party?" Hearing her say it out loud, so bluntly, solidified my resolve. She was right. This was not a simple marital spat over finances. This was a fundamental betrayal of trust, a desecration of something sacred. "What are you going to do?" Chloe asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "He thinks I'm just going to cool off and let him come back. He thinks this will all blow over." "You can't let that happen," she said firmly. "You cannot let him get away with this. You need to protect yourself, Clara, legally and financially." "The bank manager said I should file a police report," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Then you file a police report," Chloe said without hesitation. "And you call a lawyer, a divorce lawyer, a good one, a shark." We talked for over an hour. Chloe let me cry, she let me rage, and then she helped me make a plan. First, change all my passwords. Every single one. Bank accounts, email, social media, everything. Second, gather all the evidence, print the bank statements, save the invoices for the party if I could find them. Third, contact a lawyer. She gave me the name of the one her sister had used in her messy divorce. "She's expensive, but she's worth it," Chloe said. "She will eat him alive." After I hung up with Chloe, I felt a flicker of strength return. I had a path forward. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was going to fight back. I started with the passwords. It was a tedious process, but with each new password I created, I felt a small piece of my stolen security returning. Then I went into Mark's home office. I had been avoiding the room since he left. It felt like his territory. But I pushed past the discomfort and started searching for the party invoices. I found them in a folder on his desk, neatly organized. Elegant Events, LLC. The total amount matched the wire transfer to the penny. I made copies of everything. The hardest part was the thought of Eleanor. Was she just a clueless beneficiary of her son's crime? Or was she a willing participant? My gut told me it was the latter. I remembered all the little digs she had made over the years. It must be so nice not to have to worry about money, Clara. Are you sure you want to wear that? It's a bit simple. Mark tells me you're thinking of starting a business. That's a lovely little hobby for you. She had always seen me as an outsider, as someone who hadn't earned her place in their perfect family. And my inheritance, the one thing that gave me independence from them, was a constant source of resentment for her. She saw it as unearned wealth, and she wanted a piece of it. I needed to know for sure. I couldn't just accuse her without proof. But how could I get it? Mark would never betray his mother, and Eleanor was too smart to admit anything. I decided to try a different angle. Mark's younger sister, Sarah. Sarah was different from the rest of the family. She was quieter, more observant. She had always been kind to me in a reserved sort of way. We weren't close, but we had a friendly relationship. I knew she was coming into town next weekend to visit her parents. Maybe I could talk to her. Maybe she had heard something. I spent the rest of the week in a state of suspended animation. I went back to work and went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I was constantly planning, strategizing. Mark had tried to call a few times and had sent a barrage of texts. They ranged from apologetic, "I miss you, I made a terrible mistake," to manipulative, "Mom is worried sick about you. You're tearing this family apart," to angry, "You can't just kick me out of my own house, I have rights." I didn't respond to any of them. I was following Chloe's advice. Do not engage. Let the lawyer do the talking. I had my first consultation with the lawyer, a formidable woman named Brenda, on Friday. I laid out the whole story, presenting her with the bank statements and the invoices. She listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, a small, grim smile on her face. "This is what we call, in legal terms, a slam dunk. He committed bank fraud and grand larceny. The fact that you're married is irrelevant. He stole your separate, non-marital property. You have him dead to rights." Hearing it put so clinically was both terrifying and validating. "What happens now?" I asked. "We have a few options," Brenda explained. "We can use this as leverage in the divorce settlement. We demand full repayment of the funds, plus damages, in exchange for not pressing criminal charges. Or we can do both. We file for divorce and we file a police report. The district attorney will almost certainly press charges. He'll have a criminal record. It could affect his career." "He works in finance, you said?" "Yes," I said. "A fraud conviction would be devastating for him," she said. "The choice is yours. How hard do you want to hit back?" I thought about it for a long moment. I thought about Mark's smug smile at the party. I thought about his accusations of me being selfish. I thought about his complete lack of remorse. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was only sorry he got caught. He needed to learn that actions have consequences. Real, life-altering consequences. "I want to do both," I said, my voice firm. "I want the divorce and I want to press charges." Brenda nodded slowly, a look of respect in her eyes. "All right then," she said. "Let's get to work." I left her office feeling like a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had an ally. I had a plan. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a powerful sense of determination. I was taking back control of my life. The next step was talking to Sarah. I sent her a text, asking if she was free to get coffee on Saturday morning. She agreed immediately, seeming happy to hear from me. I suggested a neutral place, a small cafe halfway between her parents' house and mine. I didn't want to risk running into Eleanor. I was nervous as I waited for her at the cafe. What if she took their side? What if she thought I was overreacting just like Mark did? But when she walked in and saw me, her face broke into a warm, genuine smile. She gave me a hug. "It's so good to see you, Clara," she said. "I was so sorry to hear you and Mark are having problems." So, the family narrative was already being spun. We were having problems. I wondered what version of the story she had been told. We ordered our coffees and made small talk for a few minutes. Then I took a deep breath and decided to just be direct. Sarah, I began, I need to talk to you about something serious, and I need to ask you to just listen with an open mind. She looked concerned. Of course. What's going on? I told her everything. I started with the speech, the call from the bank, and the exact amount of money that was taken from my inheritance account. I watched her face as I spoke. Her initial confusion turned to shock, and then to a look of dawning horror. She put her hand over her mouth. Oh my God, she whispered. He didn't. He did, I said quietly. And when I confronted him, he said it was for your mother. He said he didn't want to disappoint her. Sarah was silent for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a mixture of shame and anger. I believe you, she said. 100%. And the worst part is, I'm not even surprised. What do you mean? I asked. She sighed, a heavy, weary sound. My mother, she's been obsessed with that money of yours since the day you and Mark got engaged. She talks about it all the time. Not in a direct way, you know? It's always little comments. Clara is so lucky she doesn't have our worries. It must be nice to have that kind of a safety net. She was jealous. Deeply, deeply jealous. She felt like you had something she didn't, something you didn't earn in her eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was exactly what I had suspected. A few weeks before the party, Sarah continued, her voice low. I was on the phone with her. She was complaining about the cost of the caterer, and then she said something really strange. She said, "Don't you worry. I have a plan to make it all work out. Mark and I have figured out a way to fund this party without it costing us a thing." I asked her what she meant, but she just got all secretive and changed the subject. At the time, I thought she meant she had found a cheaper vendor or something. But now, she trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. She was talking about your money. She planned this with him. They planned it together. There it was. The confirmation I needed. It wasn't just Mark. It was Eleanor. She was the architect of this betrayal. She had manipulated her own son into committing a felony, all to satisfy her own vanity and jealousy. The rage I felt was so intense it was almost blinding. They used him, Sarah said, her voice filled with disgust. She used his desire to please her. He's always been weak when it comes to her. She knows exactly which buttons to push. He's a grown man, Sarah, I said, my voice hard. He made a choice. He chose to steal from his wife to make his mother happy. That's not weakness. That's a complete lack of character. You're right, she said, nodding. You're absolutely right. God, Clara. I am so sorry. On behalf of the sane part of my family, I am so sorry. It's not your fault, I said. But I need to know. Will you help me? If it comes down to it, would you be willing to tell your father what you know? Would you be willing to testify about that phone call? She looked scared. I could see the conflict in her eyes. It was one thing to be sympathetic in a private conversation. It was another thing to actively take a side against her own mother and brother. But after a long moment, she met my gaze and her expression hardened with resolve. Yes, she said. I will. What they did is wrong. It's not just wrong, it's sick. They need to be held accountable. I felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought me to tears. I wasn't alone in this. I had an ally on the inside. We sat and talked for another hour, piecing together the timeline, sharing stories of Eleanor's past manipulations. It was like a dam had broken for Sarah. She told me about the way Eleanor had pitted her and Mark against each other as children, the way she controlled every aspect of their father's life. It was a pattern of behavior that had been going on for decades. I was just the latest victim. When we left the cafe, I felt like I had a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. This was about exposing a toxic family dynamic that had been allowed to fester for far too long. This was about justice. Not just for me, but for everyone Eleanor had ever manipulated. But I still needed one more thing. I needed concrete, undeniable proof of Eleanor's involvement. Sarah's testimony was powerful, but it was still her word against her mother's. I needed something they couldn't deny. I needed to find a paper trail. And I had a feeling I knew where to look. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get the proof I needed. I thought about Mark's laptop, which was still in his home office. He was careless with technology. He never logged out of anything. His email, his social media, it was all permanently signed in. I had always respected his privacy. I had never once snooped through his things, but he had forfeited any right to that privacy when he stole from me. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach at the thought of what I was about to do. It felt like a violation. But then I remembered the feeling of hearing my bank balance read out to me over the phone. The feeling of utter devastation and betrayal. That was the real violation. This was just a necessary response. I got out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I crept down the hallway to his office. The room was dark and silent. I switched on the desk lamp, casting a small pool of light on his laptop. I lifted the lid. The screen flickered to life, showing his desktop. He was still logged in. I took a deep breath and opened his email client. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the search bar. What would I even search for? Steal Clara's money? Evil plan? I decided to start simple. I typed in Eleanor. Hundreds of emails popped up. Most of them were mundane. Family photos, links to articles, plans for holidays. I started scrolling through them, going back months. It was tedious, and for a while, I thought I wouldn't find anything. Then I saw it. An email from Mark to Eleanor, sent 2 days before the party. The subject line was bank stuff. My blood ran cold. I clicked on it. The email was short. Mom, here's the login info for my online banking like you asked, just in case you need to help me with the vendor payments. Username, password. He had sent his mother his bank login information. That was careless, but it wasn't a crime. But why would she need it? I scrolled down, and there it was. Eleanor's reply, sent an hour later. My heart stopped. I read it once, then twice, then a third time just to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. Perfect, thank you, sweetie. I see you have Clara's legacy account linked to your profile. That will make things much simpler. Did you transfer the full amount like we discussed? The party planner called again this morning. She needs the final payment by 5 p.m. today to confirm the booking. Let's not leave her waiting. This is going to be the party of the year. Everyone will be so impressed. Love, Mom. I felt the air leave my lungs. It was all there, in writing. Like we discussed. Clara's legacy account. That will make things much simpler. She didn't just know about it. She had orchestrated it. She had pointed him to my account. She had encouraged him to use it. She had even followed up to make sure he had completed the theft. This was the smoking gun. This was the undeniable proof that would burn their whole world to the ground. My hands were trembling as I forwarded the entire email chain to my own personal email address. Then I forwarded it to Chloe's email and to Brenda's, just to be safe. Then I printed out 3 hard copies. I felt a wild, almost giddy sense of triumph. They thought they were so clever. They thought they were untouchable. But they had gotten sloppy, and their sloppiness was going to be their downfall. I took the printed copies and locked them in the small safe I kept in my closet, where I stored my passport and other important documents. I finally had everything I needed. The bank statements, the invoices, Sarah's testimony, and now the email. The final damning piece of the puzzle. The question was no longer what I was going to do. The question was when and how. I didn't want this to play out in a sterile lawyer's office or a cold courtroom. I wanted them to face their judgment in the court of public opinion. Their family, their friends, the very people they had been so desperate to impress. I wanted to strip away their perfect facade and show everyone the ugly, rotten truth that lay beneath. Eleanor's birthday was in 2 weeks. They were planning a big family dinner at a fancy restaurant. Everyone would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole clan. It was the perfect stage. I knew what I had to do. I would play the part of the dutiful, repentant wife. I would let Mark think I was ready to talk, ready to forgive. I would lull them into a false sense of security. And then, when they were least expecting it, when they were surrounded by the family whose approval they craved so desperately, I would drop the bomb. I would not just expose them, I would obliterate them. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I started responding to Mark's texts. I kept my replies short and non-committal. I need some time to think. I'm still very hurt. This is a lot to process. It was a delicate dance. I had to give him just enough hope to keep him from getting suspicious, but not so much that he thought he was off the hook. He suggested we meet for coffee. I told him I wasn't ready. He asked if he could come home. I told him absolutely not. Finally, he brought up his mother's birthday dinner. I know things are weird between us right now, he texted. But it would mean the world to my mom if you came. It would show everyone that we're working on things. Please, Clara. For her. It was the perfect opening. I don't know, Mark. I texted back. I'm not sure I can face her. She feels terrible about all this. He lied. She had no idea I was going to use your money. She thought I was using my bonus. She's been crying for days. The lie was so bald-faced, so audacious, it almost made me laugh. I felt a surge of contempt for him that was so strong it was almost physical. Fine, I typed. I'll come, but I'm not promising anything. Thank you. He replied instantly. Thank you, you won't regret this. We can fix this, Clara. I know we can. Oh, you will regret this, I thought. But I won't. I spent the next few days preparing for battle. I went over the plan in my head 1,000 times. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, elegant black dress. I wanted to look composed, strong, unshakable. I put the printed emails and a copy of the bank statement into my purse. I felt like a soldier arming herself for war. The night of the dinner, I was surprisingly calm. The rage had cooled into a solid, icy core of resolve. I drove to the restaurant myself. I didn't want to arrive with Mark. I wanted to walk in on my own terms. When I entered the private dining room, the whole family was already there. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the tension in the air. Mark rushed to my side, a look of immense relief on his face. You came, he whispered, trying to take my hand. I pulled it away. Hello, everyone, I said, my voice clear and steady. I smiled politely at the assembled aunts and uncles. Eleanor was at the head of the table, looking regal and self-satisfied. She gave me a tight, insincere smile. Clara, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We were so worried about you. I'm so glad you decided to join us. I wouldn't miss it for the world, I said, my smile matching hers. I took my seat, which Mark had saved for me next to him. The dinner was excruciating. The small talk was forced. The laughter was hollow. Everyone was walking on eggshells, pretending not to notice the giant, gaping chasm between me and my husband. Mark kept trying to whisper things to me. Everyone's so happy you're here. See? It's all going to be okay. I ignored him, focusing on my food. Finally, the moment came. Desserts were being served. Mark's uncle, a jovial man named Robert, raised his glass. A toast, he said, to the birthday girl. Eleanor, you look more beautiful every year. And I have to say, that anniversary party you threw was the event of the century. You and David are the most generous people I know. A chorus of agreement went around the table. Eleanor preened, soaking in the praise. Oh, it was nothing, she said with a wave of her hand. Anything for our family. We're just so blessed to be able to do it. This was it. My opening. I took a slow sip of water, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I placed my glass down on the table with a soft click that seemed to echo in the room. It really was an incredible party, Eleanor, I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at me. I had their full attention. It must have cost a fortune. I can't imagine how you managed it. Eleanor's smile tightened. She sensed the shift in the room. Well, dear, she said condescendingly, when you love your family, you find a way. Is that how it works? I asked, feigning innocence. It's funny you say that, because I was looking at my bank statement the other day, and I saw a charge that I think must be a mistake. A very big mistake. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folded bank statement. I placed it on the table in front of me. It's a charge for $112,450 to a company called Elegant Events LLC, and it came from my personal inheritance account, the money my parents left me. A collective gasp went around the table. The silence was deafening. I looked directly at Eleanor. Her face was ashen. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. Clara, this is not the time or the place, Mark hissed, grabbing my arm. I shook him off. I think this is the perfect time and place, I said, my voice rising. Because you see, I was under the impression that Eleanor paid for the party. That's what you said in your speech, wasn't it, Mark? Thank you, Mom, for paying for all of this. But this statement seems to tell a very different story. It was a loan, Mark blurted out, his voice cracking. She was going to pay me back. It was a simple misunderstanding. A loan? I said, raising an eyebrow. A loan that you took from my private account without my permission, using my password and security questions? That's not called a loan, Mark. That's called theft. How dare you? Eleanor finally found her voice, her face contorted with fury. How dare you come into my birthday dinner and make these vile accusations? Mark would never do such a thing. You are a liar. Am I? I said calmly. I reached back into my purse and pulled out the second set of papers, the emails. I unfolded them and laid them on the table next to the bank statement. Then perhaps you can explain this. It's an email exchange between you and your son from 2 days before the party. I picked up the top page. My hand was perfectly steady. It starts with Mark sending you his online banking information. And then here's your reply. Shall I read it aloud? Eleanor's eyes were wide with terror. She looked at Mark, a silent, desperate plea. But he was just staring at the papers on the table, his face a mask of defeat. I think I will, I said. I cleared my throat and began to read, my voice ringing out in the silent room. Perfect, thank you, sweetie. I see you have Clara's legacy account linked to your profile. That will make things much simpler. Did you transfer the full amount like we discussed? I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked around the table. Every single person was staring at Eleanor, their expressions a mixture of shock and disgust. Her perfect facade was crumbling before their very eyes. I continued reading. The party planner called again this morning. She needs the final payment by 5 p.m. today to confirm the booking. Let's not leave her waiting. This is going to be the party of the year. Everyone will be so impressed. I placed the paper back on the table. So, you see? I said, my voice soft but firm. It wasn't a misunderstanding. And it wasn't just Mark. It was a conspiracy. You planned this together. You used your own son to steal from me. Also, you could look impressive in front of your friends. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint clinking of cutlery from the main dining room. Eleanor just sat there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. But no words coming out. She looked small, pathetic. All the arrogance and condescension had vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated shame. My father-in-law, David, who had been silent this whole time, slowly stood up. He looked at his wife, and then at his son. His face was a thundercloud of disappointment and rage. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. Eleanor, he said, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. Get your coat. We're leaving. He looked at Mark. And you. You are no longer my son. He turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a look of genuine sorrow in his eyes. Clara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I am ashamed. Deeply ashamed. And with that, he turned and walked out of the room. Eleanor, sobbing, stumbled after him. Mark just sat there, his head in his hands. The rest of the family started to get up, murmuring to each other, avoiding my eyes. They left one by one, until it was just me, Mark, and Sarah left in the room. Sarah came over and put her hand on my shoulder. Are you okay? She asked softly. I nodded, a single tear finally escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. I think so, I said. I think I will be. Mark finally looked up at me, his eyes red and pleading. Clara, he whispered, please don't do this. We can fix this. I looked at the broken man in front of me. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no love. Just a vast empty space where all of those things used to be. No, Mark, I said, my voice clear and final. We can't. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. I stood up, collected my papers from the table, and put them back in my purse. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. I took a deep breath. It was the first clean, easy breath I had taken in weeks. It was over. The lies were exposed. The truth was out. And I was free. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The family imploded. David, true to his word, effectively disowned both his wife and his son. He moved into the guest room of their house and refused to speak to Eleanor. He cut Mark off financially, which, as it turned out, was a significant blow. Mark had always been subsidized by his father, a fact he had conveniently omitted during our marriage. Sarah told me that their father had called a family meeting with his brothers and sisters and told them the entire story. Eleanor, who had built her entire identity around being the perfect matriarch, became a pariah overnight. No one would take her calls. No one would visit. Her social life, the thing she valued above all else, was annihilated. Mark, predictably, did not take it well. He bombarded me with calls and texts, alternating between pathetic apologies and vicious accusations. He blamed me for ruining his life, for destroying his family. He showed up at my house one night, drunk and belligerent, demanding to be let in. I called the police. Seeing him being escorted away in the back of a police car, shouting my name, was a surreal and sad experience. I felt a flicker of pity for the man he had become, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of his betrayal. Brenda, my lawyer, filed a restraining order the next day. The legal process moved forward. Brenda was, as Chloe had promised, a shark. She used the evidence of the fraud to negotiate a divorce settlement that was swift and overwhelmingly in my favor. I got the house. I got to keep all of my own savings and investments. And of course, Mark was ordered to repay the full $112,450 with interest. He was forced to sell his car and cash out his retirement accounts to do it. The money was wired back into my legacy account. Seeing the balance restored felt like a profound victory. It wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming what was mine. My future, my parents' memory. I also went forward with the criminal charges. I met with a detective and gave my statement, providing him with all the evidence I had collected. He was sympathetic and professional. A few weeks later, the district attorney's office called to inform me that they were charging Mark with grand larceny and computer fraud. The case is still pending, but Brenda is confident he will be convicted. He will have a criminal record. His career in finance is over. I sold the house. It had too many bad memories. I used the proceeds, along with a portion of my inheritance, to finally start my own business, a small graphic design studio. It's what my parents would have wanted. It's hard work, but it's mine. Every success, every small victory, feels like I am honoring their legacy in a way that Mark and Eleanor could never comprehend. I talk to Sarah regularly. Our shared experience has forged a strange but strong bond between us. She tells me that her mother is a shell of her former self. She rarely leaves the house. She lost everything that mattered to her status, her husband's respect, and her son's future. She got the party she wanted, but the cost was her entire life. Sometimes I think about that night at the restaurant. The look on their faces when they realized they had been caught. The satisfying, terrible silence as their world came crashing down around them. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel triumphant either. I just feel a quiet sense of justice. They made me a victim, but I refused to stay one. They tried to take my future, so I took theirs. They thought my kindness was weakness. They thought my trust was an invitation to be exploited. They learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that they were wrong. They finally learned what it feels like to be powerless. And that is a lesson I will never have to teach them again.